On a first-class flight aboard SilverWing Airlines, the quiet hum of the cabin suddenly grew heavy thick with tension when a middle-aged white man named Gregory Haynes turned to the black woman beside him and said coldly, "People like you don't belong here." The entire cabin froze. Not a word. Only the low sigh of the engines and the uneasy glances of every other passenger. The woman, Dr. Alana Pierce, dressed in a sleek gray suit, simply closed her eyes. No anger, no protest, just a calm so steady. It was almost disarming. If it were you, what would you do? How would you react being humiliated in front of dozens of strangers judged only by the color of your skin, or by someone deciding you weren't refined enough to sit there? But then, something no one expected happened. Because the woman they had dismissed, the one he said didn't belong, was the very person who held the power to decide the fate of that entire flight. Stay with me as we unfold the story. Black CEO told, "You don't belong." Then the plane learns who owns the airline. A lesson about dignity, intelligence, and justice, written among the clouds. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this journey is just beginning. The first-class cabin of SilverWing Airlines always carried a distinctive luxury, that subtle scent of polished wood blended with freshly brewed Arabica coffee served on silver trays. Everything was arranged to make you feel as though you belonged to a different class. But that morning, what filled the air wasn't elegance. It was a sentence that froze the entire cabin. "You people always think you belong up here." The voice of Gregory Haynes, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, cut through the silence so sharply you could hear the click of a seatbelt fastening. The words weren't shouted, weren't crude, but they hit like a slap. They didn't just insult Dr. Alana Pierce, the black woman seated in 2A. They pierced something deeper, that universal ache of being told you don't belong. Alana turned her head, her eyes calm and steady. No anger, no words, just a look that stripped away pretense. Gregory leaned back, lips curving with the smug satisfaction of a man convinced he had spoken the truth. A few passengers glanced over. Some pressed their lips tight. Others pretended to read their papers. The silence heavier than the insult itself. Alana set her coffee cup back on the tray. Her hand was steady, though her breath slowed just a little. She'd heard words like that before in boardrooms, on sidewalks, sometimes in places people called professional. But every time, she chose one thing: composure. When flight attendant Sarah Delaney walked by, Gregory spoke again. "I think she's in the wrong seat. You might want to check her ticket." Sarah hesitated. On her tablet screen, Alana's ticket clearly showed first class. SilverWing Elite member, but instead of stopping there, Sarah forced a polite smile. "Maybe it's a system glitch. Ma'am, let me just verify it." In that moment, Alana realized she wasn't just being insulted by one man. She was facing an entire system trained to doubt anyone who didn't fit the image of power. She smiled gently. "And what exactly would you like to verify? That I could afford this seat, or that I deserve to sit in it?" The question left Sarah speechless. But instead of apologizing, she turned to call Mark Ellison, the head attendant. "Just to make sure we follow protocol," she said. That phrase, "follow protocol," sounded reasonable, yet it disguised a quiet cruelty. When Mark arrived, his tone was brisk. "Ma'am, we just need to confirm the standard." "Standard for whom?" Alana asked, her voice low and steady. The cabin held its breath. A short question, but it sliced clean through the pretense. Gregory cleared his throat. "You're making a scene. People like you always think everyone's out to get you." "No, I don't think that," Alana replied. I just document the truth in case anyone needs to review it later." She picked up her phone, opened the camera, and set it neatly on her tray. No threats, no shouting, just an action, small, deliberate, powerful enough to drain the color from Mark's face. The cabin door opened, and Captain David Raines stepped in, tall, composed, the kind of man used to being obeyed. "What's going on here?" Sarah explained, carefully leaving out the part about the insult. David nodded slowly, then said the sentence Alana had heard her whole life. "We just want to make sure everyone's comfortable." Comfortable for whom? For the man who just spat prejudice? For the passengers too afraid of trouble? Or for a system that preferred peace over justice, silence over truth? Alana met his eyes and replied softly, "So do I, Captain." And comfort begins with not insulting anyone. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. David hesitated. Gregory looked away. And the silence that followed carried a new tone awareness. At 30,000 feet, in a gleaming metal cabin, a black woman was teaching those who believed they were elite a lesson in dignity, not through outrage, but through intentional calm. She didn't need to shout to prove her worth. Because the truly powerful don't fight for a seat, they redefine what that seat means. An elderly passenger in the back whispered softly, "She's right." It was a small voice, yet it rang through the cabin like a church bell cracking the shell of silence. Alana knew she had just reached that thin line between endurance and awakening. And she also knew this was only the beginning. Amid the murmurs, she unlocked her phone and sent a brief message, "Protocol 7 ready." That calm blink of her eyes, no one realized it had just triggered a chain reaction that, within minutes, would change the course of the entire flight and the fate of those who thought power only came in lighter shades of skin. The air inside SilverWing Airlines' first-class cabin still hung heavy after the earlier insult like smoke that refused to fade. The passengers had gone silent, but not because the moment had passed. No, everyone was waiting to see what the black woman in seat 2A would do next. "Doctor," Alana Pierce sat quietly. She reached into her bag, pulled out a slim book, flipped through a few pages, then took a calm sip of coffee. Every small movement carried one unspoken message. She wasn't going to react the way they expected her to. But silence in a place like this is never harmless. It always hides something, and this time, it hid suspicion. Gregory Haynes, the man who had thrown the insult, leaned back in his seat with a disdainful sigh. He raised his hand to summon flight attendant Sarah Delaney. "This woman seems to be in the wrong seat," he drawled, loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. "You might want to double-check. We pay for a certain standard here, don't we?" Sarah glanced at Alana, then at her tablet. The ticket number, seat, and name all matched perfectly. Everything was in order. But instead of stopping there, Sarah's brow furrowed that subtle frown of someone who thinks something isn't right, even when reason gives her no proof. "Let me just verify a few things, ma'am," she said softly to Alana, her tone polite but edged with chill. Alana lifted her gaze. "And what exactly would you like to verify?" Sarah flushed not from embarrassment, but from being seen through. "Sometimes the app makes mistakes, ma'am. It might have assigned the wrong class, a small sentence, seemingly harmless, but within it lived a whole system of bias. The assumption that if someone doesn't look first class, the system must have erred." Gregory smirked, the corner of his mouth twisting upward. "Told you, those mistakes happen all the time." A few passengers nodded, quietly affirming their own silent prejudices, and instead of addressing the man making the baseless complaint, Sarah turned to the woman who had been insulted to verify. That's how bias works. It doesn't need shouting. Just a glance, a tone, a sliver of doubt, and suddenly, the whole system leans toward the lighter-skinned side of the equation. Alana knew that pattern. She'd seen it for 20 years in boardrooms, in project evaluations, in the way people said, "You speak so intelligently," for a black woman. But this morning, aboard this flight, she was no longer the one being judged. She was the one observing how the system exposed itself. "Sarah," she said calmly, "if the app might be wrong, perhaps you should check Mr. Haynes's ticket too." The words were soft but sharp as a wire. Sarah froze for a second, then forced a laugh. "Oh, no need. He's a verified platinum member." "So am I," Alana replied, her eyes calm and unwavering. The cabin fell silent again. But this silence was different. It carried traces of shame, discomfort, and the faintest ripple of guilt spreading among those who'd been watching. Sarah's eyes darted toward Mark Ellison, the head attendant who had just arrived. Mark's tall, authoritative frame and clipped tone carried an air of command. "What's going on here?" he asked. Sarah spoke quickly. "Just a small verification issue. Oh, sir, Mrs. Pierce's ticket appears slightly off in the system." Mark glanced at the screen. Everything was perfect. Yet instead of confirming it outright, he nodded thoughtfully. "Better double-check. We want full transparency." There it was again. Procedure. A word that sounded proper, even noble. But in that moment, Alana saw it for what it was, the most polished shield for prejudice. "Transparency?" she asked softly, a trace of irony in her smile. "Of course. I value that too. But I do wonder, transparent, for whom Mark hesitated." Gregory turned away, gripping his wine glass tighter. Outside the window, sunlight broke through a bank of white clouds, casting a golden glow over Alana's serene face. In that light, she was no longer the woman being verified. She was the one verifying everyone else's humanity. Sarah sent a message to the cockpit manual verification requested. Alana saw the reflection of the text in the window. She sighed quietly. "You know, Sarah," she said gently, "I used to believe prejudice lived only in people's thoughts. But today, I see I'm sitting in a living, breathing example of it." Sarah pressed her lips together. She didn't answer. Something in Alana's voice unsettled her. Not fear, but shame. Gregory shifted uncomfortably. His smug expression faltered. His eyes darted away. The suspicion he'd sown was now a mirror, and he didn't like what he saw in it. A few moments later, Mark murmured to Sarah, "Call the captain. He should be aware of this." Alana heard every word. She smiled, a thin, knowing smile, as if she had expected this all along. She unlocked her phone, where a message draft waited Protocol 7 standby. A single tap, small, deliberate, but it carried weight, because if this first-class cabin was testing her, they were about to learn something the woman they were testing wasn't just any passenger. The cabin door opened with a soft hiss. Captain David Raines stepped in, his expression stern and assessing. His eyes swept the scene, the scowling white man, the uneasy attendants, the head steward masking uncertainty, and the poised black woman with calm eyes and a steady hand resting on her phone. He drew a deep breath and asked, "What seems to be the problem here?" And in that moment, everything poised on the edge of change, where polite masks would begin to crack, revealing the truth beneath power and fear. Bathed in the soft light of the first-class cabin, Dr. Alana Pierce quietly closed the book on her lap. She knew this moment would define not only how they saw her, but how they'd see people like her. And as Captain David Rains stepped forward, the standard protocol they were about to perform would prove to be anything but standard. The first-class cabin door clicked shut behind Captain David Rains, and the air seemed to grow heavier. No one spoke. Only the hum of the engines filled the silence. At 30,000 feet, a standard verification procedure was about to begin, though everyone knew it had little to do with actual standards. Dr. Alana Pierce remained still in seat Bauue. She didn't fidget or flare in anger. She simply observed, calm, composed, watching each person scramble to manage a situation they didn't realize was a test of their own character. Head attendant. Mark Ellison held his tablet, trying to sound steady, though the tension in his voice betrayed him. Mrs. Pierce, just to follow protocol. We'll need to verify a few details. It's just a small procedural step. Alana tilted her head slightly, curiosity glinting in her eyes, not fear. Protocol, you say. And this protocol, who exactly is it for? Mr. Ellison? Her tone was calm, but her words sliced through the air like glass. No one moved. Even Gregory Haynes, the man who had started all this, seemed to shrink a little in his seat, though his lips stayed pursed in false confidence. Mark hesitated. He'd dealt with hundreds of difficult passengers, but never one who questioned him with such quiet precision, with a voice that didn't need to rise, because power itself spoke through composure. We're just following regulation. Ma'am, I understand, Alana said with a small smile. But what I'm asking is, does this regulation apply to everyone here? Or just to me, Sarah Delaney, the young attendant, looked down, fingers tightening around her serving tray. It was a question she couldn't answer, because deep down, she already knew the truth. No one else in first class was being re-verified. No one else was being asked to show their ticket again, though the system clearly displayed every passenger's credentials. Only one person, the only black woman in the cabin, was being questioned under the guise of procedure. Mark sighed. Mrs. Pierce, I'm afraid we'll need your cooperation to avoid confusion among the other passengers. Alana nodded gently, her tone unchanged. Mr. Ellison, if I leave this seat, that would cause confusion. I've done nothing wrong to prove, but if you'd like documentation, I think it's only fair that we both record it. She picked up her phone, placed it on the tray table, and with a light tap, activated the camera. The small recording light reflected across her calm face, serene, resolute. There were no threats in her gesture, no raised voice, yet both Mark and Sarah froze. In that instant, the balance of power shifted. The ones wearing the uniforms, the ones representing the airline, suddenly became the subjects of observation. Every glance, every breath, every word now accountable. Alana didn't need to shout. Her quiet certainty did all the work. I don't want trouble, she said softly. I just want fairness. And sometimes, fairness begins only when people are forced to look at themselves. A man seated behind her, older, perhaps in his 60s, looked up and gave a small nod. He said nothing, but in his eyes, Alana saw understanding. Mark turned to the captain, searching for an escape. David Rains crossed his arms, his tone clipped. Mrs. Pierce, I'll have to ask you to turn that camera off. Recording inside the cabin isn't permitted without crew approval. I know that rule, Captain, Alana replied evenly. But I believe we're talking about two different regulations here, yours, and the one that protects citizens from discrimination. The cabin went still. Mark pressed his lips together. Sarah looked away, and Gregory, the man who started it all, suddenly regretted every word. Alana's voice softened, almost like a teacher explaining a simple truth. For years, I believed power belonged to the loudest voice in the room. But I've learned, real power lies with the one who stays calm when everyone else begins to tremble. She leaned back, folded her hands on her lap, and turned her gaze toward the window, where sunlight spilled through clouds of silver. David took a deep breath, trying to reassert control. "We're only following procedure, ma'am." "I don't blame you," Alana replied gently. "The problem isn't the people. It's the procedure. When systems are built without room for humanity, they become the perfect hiding place for prejudice." Her words landed softly, but they echoed like truth itself. A few passengers began whispering. A middle-aged woman in a tailored suit leaned toward her companion. "Is she wrong?" she murmured. No one answered, because deep down, everyone knew she wasn't. They simply weren't used to hearing truth spoken by someone the world had taught them not to listen to. David checked his watch, his patience thinning. "We'll have to contact ground security. You may need to deplane before takeoff." Alana nodded, no resistance, no fear, only readiness in her eyes. She tapped her phone once more. The message was sent Protocol 7 ready. No one knew what it meant, but in a few minutes they would. Outside, the sun had risen fully. Light streamed through the cabin windows, illuminating every face, revealing discomfort, guilt, and the dawning shame of those who had thought themselves above it all. As Captain David Rains left the cabin to report to security, no one realized that the real confrontation was only beginning, because the woman they intended to remove from the plane was the very person who could decide who would never fly again. The first-class cabin of SilverWing Airlines had fallen into an eerie kind of silence. Outside, the engines hummed with steady rhythm like a heartbeat trying to stay calm, but inside, the air was thick enough to slice through. Every gaze was fixed on Dr. Alana Pierce, the poised black woman in seat 2A. Across the aisle sat Gregory Haynes, the man who had sparked the storm with one prejudice-laden remark. And then, the cabin door opened again. Captain David Rains stepped in uniform crisp, posture straight, presence commanding. He didn't need to raise his voice. His very arrival made the crew instinctively stand taller. "Good morning. I heard there's been a bit of trouble." His tone was low, composed, and weary, the kind of voice used by someone who sees their job as keeping order, no matter the cost. Mark Ellison, the head attendant, spoke first. "Just a minor misunderstanding, Captain. A passenger raised a concern about seating, and we're re-verifying the ticket." David nodded, not asking for details. He gave Gregory a quick glance, then turned his focus to Alana. His expression wasn't hostile, but it wasn't respectful either. It was evaluative. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "for the comfort of all passengers, I'd appreciate your cooperation with the crew. We'll sort this out quickly." Alana tilted her head, her smile thin and sharp as glass. "I'm happy to cooperate, Captain. But are you sure you're addressing the right problem?" David frowned slightly. "What do you mean by that, I mean?" she said softly. "The comfort you're referring to seems reserved for a very particular kind of passenger." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. A few people ducked their heads, pretending to scroll through their phones. Sarah Delaney, the young attendant, avoided Alana's gaze. Gregory gave a smug little smirk, pleased that someone from the airline seemed to be on his side. David looked around the cabin, then back to Alana. "Mrs. Pierce, there's nothing personal here. We just can't allow any disturbance before takeoff. That's my responsibility." "I understand," Alana said with a nod. "I'm just not sure who exactly is causing the disturbance." Gregory let out a short, mocking laugh. See, she's being difficult. I just wanted a peaceful flight without what? Mr. Haynes. Alana interrupted softly. Without me being here. The question froze him. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. David stepped in, trying to de-escalate. All right, no need to argue. We just need to confirm a few details. Then we'll depart as scheduled. But his words carried the same subtle bias as before, the bias disguised as maintaining order. Alana drew a slow breath, her tone even but firm. Captain Rains, if I understand correctly, you're asking me to move so another passenger feels more comfortable. Are you saying his comfort is worth more than my dignity? The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the faint whir of the air vents. David hesitated, trying to find words, but Alana continued, her voice calm and deliberate. I've flown hundreds of times in my life, every class, every route, and never once have I been subjected to a standard verification. Only today, when I don't look like who you expect to sit here. Sarah bit her lip, torn between guilt and fear. Gregory looked away, face flushed whether from anger or embarrassment. No one could tell. David swallowed. Despite his practiced neutrality, he knew she was right. I'm not trying to make a scene, he muttered. Neither am I, Alana replied, eyes steady. I'm only asking to be treated like everyone else. Nothing more, nothing less. She picked up her phone, the screen glowing faintly against her composed face. But if you think I'll stay silent and let this pass unnoticed, Captain, you've chosen the wrong woman. Mark Ellison stepped closer, voice dropping. Captain, maybe we should call ground security. David nodded curtly. Do it. I don't want any disruptions on this flight. The words cut through the air like cold steel. Gregory leaned back with smug satisfaction. Sarah turned away, pretending to check the passenger manifest. But Alana didn't flinch. She smiled calm, deliberate, unsettling. You know, Captain, she said softly, I'm fascinated by how people use the phrase avoid trouble. Usually it means they're unwilling to face the truth. Something flickered in David's eyes, doubt, maybe unease. Are you threatening me, ma'am? Not at all, she replied, just stating a fact. And if you truly want to avoid trouble, she paused, her gaze drifting to the window, then you might want to find out who you're speaking to. No one moved. Her voice carried an authority that didn't need volume. The air in the cabin shifted, not fear exactly, but awareness. Moments later, her phone buzzed. A new message flashed on the screen. Protocol 7 confirmed. Alana glanced at it briefly, then placed the phone back down, as if it were nothing. Captain Rains, she said evenly, if you believe procedures are sacred, then by all means, follow them. I'll be here watching where those procedures lead you. A chill ran through the crew. Sarah looked at Mark. Mark looked at David. In their eyes, a dawning realization they had picked the wrong passenger to challenge. David straightened his posture, voice tightening. Mrs. Pierce, I'll have to ask security to escort you off the plane, unless you comply. I don't comply with prejudice, Alana replied, her voice quiet but sharp. I comply with truth, and if you'd like to involve someone higher up, please do. Call the CEO of SilverWing Airlines. He'll want to hear about this. The cabin went still. David blinked. Excuse me. What did you just say? Alana smiled faintly, lifting her coffee cup for another measured sip. Call him. I promise you'll want to hear what he says. The tension in the room transformed into something electric. No one knew what was happening. But one thing was clear. The woman they had doubted was far more than she appeared. And then, before anyone could speak, Gregory Haynes shot to his feet, unable to stand the silence. He pointed at Alana and shouted words that would echo far beyond that cabin. But in that instant, when his anger met her unshakable calm, the balance of power shifted forever. Part 5. The Public Confrontation. Captain David Raines stood in the aisle, tension radiating through the quiet cabin. The passengers avoided one another's eyes. No one knew what was coming next, but everyone could feel it. Something beneath the polished surface of first-class decorum was starting to crack. Dr. Alana Pierce remained seated. She didn't bow her head. She didn't flare up. She was utterly calm, unnervingly, so like someone who had seen this scene play out 100 times before. Gregory Haynes, the man who once believed his words could shape the world around him, now found his throat tight. He couldn't stand the silence anymore. Her calmness was a mirror forcing him to see himself, stripped bare and small. "I told you," Gregory burst out, his voice trembling, though he tried to sound defiant. "People like you don't belong here." A few passengers gasped quietly. Sarah, the young flight attendant, turned away. Mark glanced at the captain, waiting for him to intervene, but David stayed silent. Maybe he knew that whatever he said now would live forever in someone's recording. Alana's gaze never wavered. "You can say it again if you'd like," she said softly. "But this time, look me in the eye." Gregory faltered, blinking as though no one had ever demanded accountability from him before. All his life, he had spoken and been obeyed without ever being challenged. "You know what I mean," he stammered. "First class isn't for all kinds of people." "All kinds of people," Alana repeated, her tone feather-light but razor-sharp. "Would you care to specify what kind you mean?" Silence. Seconds stretched into an eternity. Then, finally, anger cracked through his restraint. "You know exactly what I mean. I'm tired of everyone making it about race. But the truth is, you don't belong up here." The words fell like stones into still water, spreading ripples of shock and shame across the cabin. A few passengers looked up now, eyes wide, realizing they could no longer pretend they hadn't heard. Alana didn't laugh. She didn't raise her voice. She simply nodded once. "At last," she said, "you've said what you really believe." It was quiet, but devastating. There was no need for accusation. Gregory had just condemned himself. Captain Raines inhaled slowly, turning away from Alana's gaze, a gaze that carried not fury, but disappointment. Not because he discriminated, but because he'd stayed silent. "Captain Raines," she said softly, voice steady and resonant, "is this how SilverWing Airlines treats its passengers?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. In that moment, the authority of rank, uniform, even command meant nothing. Alana turned back to Gregory, her tone gentler now, yet heavier than before. "You say I don't belong here? But maybe you've forgotten that people like me built the world that lets you sit here." From the back row, an elderly man lifted his head and whispered, almost reverently, "She's right." The agreement was quiet, but it hit like a thunderclap. The first crack of an avalanche of awareness. Gregory looked around, waiting for anyone to defend him. No one did. Isolation settled on him like a weight, the same weight he'd spent his life placing on others. Sarah approached, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, please, calm down." "I'm calm," he shouted, startling the cabin. "She's filming me. She's trying to ruin me." Alana gently set her phone on the tray table, her eyes never leaving his. I don't need to ruin anyone. Mr. Haynes, the camera only records the truth, and truth doesn't need editing. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was transformative. Every person in that cabin understood, at last, that something far larger than a seat dispute was unfolding. David finally turned to Mark Ellison. "Call ground security. We can't take off like this." Mark nodded, but as his eyes met Alana's, something shifted. He saw not a disruptive passenger, but the only person in the cabin holding the situation together with dignity. Alana looked back at the captain, her tone softer now, almost sorrowful. "I've spent my life sitting in rooms where others believed I didn't belong, and I've learned this people can only take your dignity if you hand it to them." No one replied. The entire cabin had become a mirror reflecting not just prejudice, but the quiet cowardice of witnesses. Gregory collapsed back into his seat, staring at her. His arrogance had drained away. What remained was a man realizing, too late, that he had crossed a line he could never uncross. Alana's voice came again, calm and clear. "You think I don't belong here? Say it." He couldn't. Not anymore. Not because he feared her, but because he feared hearing himself. The cabin was utterly still. Outside, sunlight spilled through the clouds, painting her face in gold. Alana closed her eyes for a breath, not to control her anger, but to mark the end. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Haynes. And I'll say this only once." Her eyes opened, steady as stone, her voice carrying the weight of truth itself. "I belong anywhere human dignity is respected, and today I'm here to make sure it is. As Dr." Alana Pierce's words lingered in the charged air. The small light on her phone continued to blink, recording every breath, every glance, every truth. And with one final message, Protocol 7 would turn this quiet confrontation into a global reckoning. The first-class cabin of SilverWing Airlines was frozen in silence. The engines outside purred steadily, but inside, every passenger heard something else, the quiet hum of realization, of discomfort, of truths they'd rather not confront. "Doctor..." Alana Pierce sat still, her hand resting lightly on her phone. The small light from its camera glowed against her cheek, not a symbol of defiance, but of a woman who had decided the truth would not be buried this time. After forcing Gregory Haynes to reveal his true beliefs, the cabin had gone deathly still. Captain David Rains took a step back, clearing his throat, trying to reclaim control. "Mrs. Pierce, if you don't turn off that device, I'll have to call ground security. You'll be escorted off the plane." His voice was calm, but beneath it trembled the realization that he was no longer in charge. Alana looked up, her expression serene, her voice gentle, yet carrying across the room. "Do what you think is right, Captain, but if you're calling anyone, make sure it's Nathan Clark." The name hit like turbulence. Gregory frowned. Sarah's eyes darted nervously. Even Mark Ellison, who had tried to stay neutral, blinked in disbelief. "Nathan Clark, the CEO of SilverWing?" David asked, his tone unsteady. "That's right," Alana said. "And trust me, he'll want to hear everything that's just been said." No one quite understood what she meant, but the certainty in her voice left no room for doubt. Alana tapped her screen once more. A message appeared. Protocol 7 initiate. Recording live feed. 2 short lines, but her team would understand instantly. Within 90 seconds, the footage from her phone was mirrored and secured across the encrypted network of Aurora Communications, the tech company she herself had founded before becoming co-chair of SilverWing Airlines. Outside, Nothing seemed to change. But in the digital world, servers were waking up, systems coming alive. Sarah stammered, "Ma'am, we're just following protocol, I understand." "Sarah," Alana interrupted softly, "but what you may not realize is this protocol is being recorded, and sometimes light is the only thing that shows us where we really stand." Mark wiped sweat from his brow, trying to sound composed. "Captain, maybe we should handle this quietly before the media gets wind of it." Media David frowned. "This is an internal issue. How could anyone?" He didn't finish. Mark's phone buzzed. He looked down to see a company alert flashing across the screen. "Flight 227 flagged. Live report feed detected. HQ notified." Their eyes met, both stunned. Gregory, sensing the shift, began to panic. "What the hell's going on? Who gave you permission to record? I'll sue you." Alana turned her gaze toward him, calm and almost kind. "You're free to do that, Mr. Haynes, but before you call your lawyer, you might want to ask who actually owns this airline." A pause. Then David took a hesitant step closer. "Mrs. Pierce, what are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," she said. "I'm stating a fact. I'm not just a passenger. Captain, I'm co-founder of SilverWing Airlines and executive chair of the parent company." The air vanished from the room. Sarah dropped her pen. Gregory's jaw fell open. Mark stood frozen, as if the floor beneath him had given way. And David felt his spine go cold. "I had no idea." "I know," Alana said softly. "And that's exactly the problem. When people believe authority comes from the uniform they wear, they forget that justice wears no color and no rank." She pressed a button. On screen, new text appeared. Recording uploaded, forwarded to legal and PR departments. The footage, every word, every tone, was now in the hands of SilverWing's board of directors and its media oversight team. Passengers were beginning to whisper. One middle-aged man leaned to his seatmate. "My God, she really runs the company." Alana turned to him with a gentle smile. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what we learn from this. Every person in this cabin should remember dignity isn't given. It's defended." Gregory bowed his head, silent, shaken. David stood still, caught between shame and admiration. I'm sorry, Mrs. Pierce," he murmured. "I truly didn't realize." "You don't have to realize who I am," Alana said quietly. "Just recognize the difference between keeping order and keeping justice." She powered off the camera and set her phone aside. No threats, no boasts. The message had already been delivered. She turned to Sarah, her tone warm now. "You're young. You can do better than this. Don't let anyone tell you prejudice is just part of the job." Sarah nodded, eyes glistening a mix of shame and gratitude. David turned away and began walking toward the cockpit. His footsteps were heavy. He didn't need to be told what came next. This flight would mark a turning point in his career, in the company, perhaps in the industry itself. As Captain David Raines disappeared into the cockpit, his footsteps faded into the steady hum of the engines. But within minutes, Protocol 7 would go live, sending a priority alert across SilverWing's global network. And then, the airline would learn that small verification incident had just become the biggest lesson in its history. The moment Captain David Raines stepped out of first class, everyone thought the ordeal was almost over. Once Dr. Alana Pierce was escorted off, the plane could take off, and life would return to normal. But what they didn't know was that normal had just been rewritten by the very woman they believed didn't belong there. She sat quietly, hands folded neatly on her lap, the soft light of her phone blinking. Then a message appeared. "Ready when you are." Alana pressed send. That was all it took. No commotion, no grand declaration, just a single tap. Protocol 7. A plan known only to a handful within SilverWing's executive circle was now live. At SilverWing's corporate headquarters, deep within the security network, an alert went out. Servers began routing encrypted data. Legal, PR, and executive departments across the system received a flashing red message incident on Flight 227. Live feed incoming. No one on board could see it, but the gears of corporate accountability had already begun to turn. Back inside the aircraft, Mark Ellison, the head attendant, stood at the front of the cabin, trying to maintain composure. His voice wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has contacted ground security. This matter will be resolved shortly. This matter, 2 simple words, sharp as dull knives." Everyone knew the matter wasn't about a seat or a ticket. It was about the woman in seat 2A, the black passenger who had refused to disappear quietly. A few passengers nodded. A man behind Gregory whispered, "If she just complied, we'd be in the air by now." Another muttered, "First class isn't the place for political drama." They weren't hateful, just comfortable. That quiet, ordinary comfort that lets prejudice survive for centuries under the name of keeping peace. Alana heard every word. She turned slightly, her voice calm but deliberate, every syllable landing like a gavel against wood. "I'm not arguing. I'm existing. In a space where some people believe I shouldn't." The air cracked like glass. No one responded. Sarah stood motionless, fingers twisting together. Gregory stared at the window, his face tight with something between shame and anger. Then came the chime of the intercom. Mark picked up the phone, listened a few seconds, and went pale. "The captain says security will board in a few minutes," he announced. "Please remain seated." Alana tilted her head, a faint smile curving her lips. "Very well," she said quietly. "Let's wait. But let's also make sure everything is recorded clearly when they arrive." She lifted her phone again, turning the camera toward the front of the cabin. The blue glow of the screen lit her features, her eyes calm but fierce beneath the sterile cabin lights. "I'm not doing this to cause trouble," she said steadily. "I'm doing this so you'll remember what it feels like when a human being is treated as if they don't exist, simply because they don't look like you." Across from her, an elderly woman with silver hair raised her head and nodded. "She's right," the woman said softly. "I've seen this happen too many times, and I've stayed silent too long." Alana gave her a grateful smile, then turned to Gregory. "Isn't it remarkable, Mr. Haynes, how one small phone can reveal so much? No shouting, no violence, just truth." Gregory's face flushed red. He slammed his palm on the armrest. "You're destroying this flight. You don't know what you're doing." "No," she replied, her tone almost tender. "I'm saving it." Her words rippled through the cabin, soft, yet charged with power. It wasn't a lesson. It was a mirror, because the calm of one person had just forced an entire system to face itself. Mark stepped forward, voice low. "Mrs. Pierce, please, we can handle this later. Could you turn off the camera?" "I will," she said. "When someone from CEO Nathan Clark's office is here. When every name, every silence, and every cover-up is accounted for." Mark swallowed hard. He knew this was no longer their decision to make. Outside, sunlight gleamed off the wing, sharp as silver. Inside, everyone began to see their role in the picture: the liar, the bystander, the victim, and the one who had refused to be either. Then, at that exact moment, Alana's phone rang. She put it on speaker. A deep, clear male voice filled the cabin. "Alana, I'm watching the live feed. I see everything. The voice of Nathan Clark, CEO of SilverWing Airlines." The cabin went still. Sarah's eyes widened. Mark froze. Somewhere up front, David must have felt the blood drain from his face. "Nathan," Alana said calmly, "you heard what I said I did." He replied. His tone was clipped, cold. "Stay where you are. Don't leave the aircraft. Everyone involved will be held accountable." Alana smiled softly. "Thank you. Nathan, I think it's time SilverWing remembered why it was founded for human dignity, not C-class." The call ended. Silence reclaimed the air. The passengers who once whispered now sat with heads bowed. Alana slowly turned off the camera, saving the final frame. "This journey," she murmured, half to herself, "sometimes doesn't happen in the skies. It happens inside people. Outside." The sunlight slanted through the clouds, gilding her face in gold serene, unshaken, resolute, because now the truth had taken flight. But as the truth spread through the cabin, not everyone accepted it. Some whispered in anger, others in shame. And then from the back, another voice rose, one still clinging to the belief that power born of privilege would never bow its head. When CEO Nathan Clark's voice faded from the speaker, a strange stillness settled over the first-class cabin of SilverWing Airlines, as if everyone had just witnessed something far larger than they could comprehend. But within that silence, not everyone accepted the truth. Whispers began to spread. Some passengers leaned toward their companions, muttering under their breath, shaking their heads with weary disdain. "Now she's playing the victim. People like her always know how to make everything about race." The words were quiet, but they rippled through the cabin like waves. In seconds, the space that was designed for comfort divided itself in two, one side cloaked in shameful silence, the other quietly defending privilege. Dr. Alana Pierce sat still in seat 2A, hearing every word. She didn't react. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply. She knew this was no longer about her and Gregory. This was about a sickness that had lived too long in the bloodstream of society. A gray-haired man from a few rows back raised his voice, just enough to be heard. "We shouldn't let someone like her delay the entire flight." His words dropped like a stone into still water. Others chimed in, "Exactly. She should just leave so we can take off. No one wants more trouble." And there it was again, the oldest, most dangerous weapon of all complacent silence. No shouting, no slurs, just the quiet agreement of those who didn't object. Alana opened her eyes and looked around. She wasn't angry. In fact, her expression carried something heavier, a sadness worn by those who've seen this play out far too many times before. "I understand," she said, her voice calm yet cutting through the air. "I'm not disrupting anything. I'm simply existing in a place some of you believe I shouldn't." The cabin froze. No one spoke. No one dared. It wasn't a defense. It was an indictment. A reminder that her mere presence, a black woman sitting in first class, was enough to make some feel threatened. A silver-haired woman, elegant and quiet until now, whispered softly, "She's right." The man beside her, dressed in a tailored suit, looked out the window and said nothing. Alana's voice softened. "I don't blame you," she said. "Sometimes silence doesn't mean agreement. It means fear, fear of change, but silence is still a choice." No one met her eyes. Captain David Raines stepped back into the cabin, glancing at the passengers before his gaze fell on Alana. He opened his mouth to speak, but she spoke first, her tone calm, almost like a teacher addressing a class. "You know what saddens me most, Captain? It's not that they insulted me. It's that they chose to stand with what's wrong because it was easier." Her words carried no anger, yet they landed like truth's blade, sharp and clean. A young man in the front row finally spoke up, defensive. "You don't understand. We just want to take off people have places to be. You're holding everyone up." Alana smiled gently, not mocking, not bitter. "You're right. I understand. But justice doesn't always run on our schedule. Sometimes it shows up when someone's brave enough to make the world pause for a moment." A quiet hum rose from the back. No one could tell if it was agreement or reflection. Then Alana continued, her tone even, her eyes distant, as if recalling another lifetime. "I was once the little girl told to sit at the back of the classroom because people assumed I wasn't smart enough. I was the engineer passed over for promotion because clients might not be comfortable with a black woman in charge. And today, I'm just sitting in a seat I paid for, and that alone makes people uncomfortable." Sarah, the young flight attendant, blinked back tears. She realized, painfully, that she had played her own small part in those back-of-the-room moments, even if unintentionally. Gregory sat stiffly. The color drained from his face. He avoided every gaze, but it didn't matter. Every person could see him now for what he represented, that prejudice doesn't need a gun. It only needs silence. Alana rose slowly. Her voice remained soft, steady, unshaken. "If my presence here makes you this uncomfortable, maybe you should ask yourselves why. Because I've done nothing except exist." Then she sat back down, folded her hands, and added quietly, "We all want the world to get better, but we can't until we admit that sometimes we're part of the problem." Several heads bowed. A young woman nearby reached out, placing a trembling hand on Alana's shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "I think I needed to hear that." Outside, the morning sun had risen high, flooding the cabin with light warm, blinding, revealing. And in that light, faces softened, hearts stirred. For a fleeting, sacred moment, justice didn't shout, it whispered, and that whisper was enough to silence the world. Inside, Alana felt peace, not because she'd won, but because she hadn't let silence win. But as the cabin fell quiet, another voice rose not from those who opposed her, but from the back row. A young black woman stood, her voice strong and unwavering. "She's not wrong. This is racism." And from that moment, the balance began to shift. First class aboard SilverWing Airlines sat under a heavy, unnatural silence, the kind that creeps in when people are forced to confront their own conscience. After Dr. Alana Pierce had said, "I'm simply existing in a place you believe I don't belong," no one dared to speak. No one dared to look at her. Only the hum of the engines filled the air, and the quiet breathing of successful people who had long believed they'd outgrown prejudice. Then, from the very last row, a voice broke through, sharp, steady, unafraid. "She's not wrong. This is racism." Heads turned. It came from Alicia Monroe, a tall black woman in her 40s, dressed in a chestnut business suit, her posture poised with quiet power. She rose from her seat, clutching a thick folder to her chest as if holding the weight of a truth she'd carried all her life. Mark Ellison, the head attendant, frowned and took a step forward. "Ma'am, please sit down. We'll handle this through the proper channels." Alicia smiled faintly. Her voice was calm, but it carried the authority of someone used to being heard in courtrooms. "I know those channels well. I'm an attorney." I've represented 3 racial discrimination cases in this very industry. And those proper channels you're referring to, they always seem to apply to one kind of passenger. Sarah froze. The other passengers turned toward Alicia, and not a single one dared to interrupt. If you remove her from this plane, Alicia continued, pointing toward Alana, I will serve as witness. I'll call the press, and I'll call federal counsel. Not tomorrow, today. A shockwave rippled through the cabin. Those who had quietly agreed to just get on with it suddenly looked uneasy. A few bowed their heads. Gregory Haynes, the man who had started it all, flushed crimson. This is ridiculous. Everyone's just trying to make themselves a hero. Now Alicia cut him off. No, Mr. Haynes, this isn't about being a hero. It's about what's right and wrong. Her words hit like a verdict. Even Captain David Rains, standing near the cockpit, stopped in his tracks. He looked between Alana and Alicia and for the first time saw the scene not as an inconvenience, but as a reckoning. Alana turned toward Alicia, her voice soft, grateful. Thank you, but you don't have to risk yourself for me. Alicia's gaze held steady. I'm not doing this for you, Dr. Pierce. I'm doing it for me, because I've been silent long enough. That was the moment the air broke open, not with shouts, but with realization. Every person there suddenly understood silence, too, is a choice. A man in row 3 spoke quietly, shame coloring his voice. I didn't think it was that serious. I just didn't want any trouble. Alicia looked at him, not in anger, but with empathy. None of us want trouble, sir. But that's exactly why it keeps happening. Sarah stood frozen, watching the 2 women, 2 black professionals from different generations standing side by side, against the weight of an entire system. And in their eyes, she didn't see fury. She saw strength calm, unshakable, dignified. Mrs. Pierce, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have questioned your ticket. I didn't mean to, but I let bias guide me. Alana turned to her gently, voice soft as a mother's comfort. Thank you, Sarah. Admitting fault is the first step toward change. I don't hold it against you. A smattering of applause began, hesitant, but real. Then it spread, row by row, until the cabin was filled with the sound of awakening. Quiet claps of understanding. Not triumph, but transformation. Gregory looked around, his authority unraveling. You all think I'm some kind of racist? He muttered. Alicia's gaze was unwavering. If you have to ask that question, Mr. Haynes, then you already know the answer. He went silent. For the first time, his money, his voice, his confidence, none of it mattered. Truth had stripped him bare. Near the cockpit, Captain Rains gripped his radio so tightly his knuckles turned white. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but every excuse felt hollow. In his eyes was the quiet fear of a man who knew this would follow him far beyond this flight. Alicia turned toward him. Captain Rains, if you have any integrity left, you'll let her stay in her seat, because if you don't, you'll be explaining your decision in front of a federal judge. The captain drew a slow breath, and in that moment, the weight of rank, protocol, and power meant nothing, not against the courage of truth. He nodded, his voice rough. Dr. Pierce, you may remain in your seat. He swallowed. We'll depart as soon as ground control clears us. Alana said nothing. She met his eyes not in anger, but in grace. And in that silence, he felt what punishment could not deliver: shame born from forgiveness. Alicia sat back down, resting her folder on her lap. She smiled faintly. Knowing what had just happened wasn't just about a single flight. It was about perspective, about courage, about a shift. Even a small one was enough. As the passengers settled, thinking the ordeal was over, the cabin door opened again. 2 security officers stepped in, files in hand, but instead of approaching Dr. Pierce, they stopped, straightened, and bowed their heads. One of them spoke softly. "Dr. Pierce, we're here on orders not to remove you, but to protect you, directly from CEO Nathan Clark." The cabin went dead silent. The air in SilverWing Airlines' first-class cabin was so tense it felt like one more breath might make it shatter. After Alicia Monroe, the black attorney, declared she would stand as a witness. The balance of power had shifted, yet something still hung in the air. It was as though everyone sensed a door to the truth was waiting to open. And then, it did. The cabin door clicked open. 2 airport security officers stepped inside. Every passenger held their breath, eyes fixed on Dr. Alana Pierce. Everyone assumed they were there to escort her off the plane. Gregory Haynes tilted his chin with smug satisfaction. Finally, someone's doing their job. Sarah, the young flight attendant, lowered her gaze, her lips trembling. Mark Ellison, the head attendant, stared at the floor, silently praying this wouldn't end up in the headlines. But what happened next froze everyone from row 1 to the back of the cabin. The older security officer stepped forward and stopped beside Alana's seat. His voice was calm, respectful, steady. "Apologies, Dr. Pierce. We've been ordered to escort you not off the flight, but to ensure your safety for the remainder of the journey." The cabin went dead silent. Gregory's mouth fell open. "What did you just say, Doctor?" Pierce Alana smiled faintly, not proud, not angry, just quietly composed. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a silver business card, laying it on the table before Gregory. Under the cabin's soft lighting, the engraving gleamed. Dr. Alana Pierce, co-founder and chief executive officer, SilverWing Airlines. No one moved. The steady hum of the engines faded into the background, as if the world itself had gone still. Mark blinked several times, stammering, You're saying you're the CEO of SilverWing." Alana nodded once. "That's right, Mr. Ellison. I co-founded this company alongside our current CEO, Nathan Clark, and I believe—" She turned her calm gaze toward Captain David Rains. "He'll be calling us any moment now." Almost on cue, the intercom phone rang. A sharp, cold sound that cut through the silence. David hesitated, then lifted the receiver. After a brief pause, Nathan Clark's voice erupted, loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "David, what in the world are you doing?" "She's the co-founder of this airline. The very reason you have this job. You've just humiliated every single person working under the SilverWing name." David froze, pale as chalk. His hands trembled around the receiver. Nathan's tone grew even harsher. "Return to your seat now. As of this moment, you are relieved of command until further notice. I expect your written report on my desk within 24 hours. And David, yes, sir, you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The line went dead. No one spoke. Alana sat quietly, her hands folded, eyes steady and calm. "I told you, Captain," she said softly. "You should have called the right person." Sarah, standing nearby, wiped her eyes. Her voice quivered. "I'm so sorry. Dr. Pierce, I didn't know." Alana turned to her, smiling gently warm as morning sunlight. "It's all right, Sarah. I was once in your shoes. There was a time I believed suspicion was safer than understanding. But I learned what defines our worth isn't the seat we sit in, but how we treat the person beside us. Gregory sat rigid, his face flushed crimson. I can't believe this. You're the CEO. Why didn't you say so from the start? Alana met his gaze calmly. If I had, would you have treated me differently? And if the answer is yes, then that's exactly the problem, isn't it? He had no answer. His head dropped. The security officers nodded respectfully to Alana before leaving. The cabin's atmosphere shifted like a thick fog lifting to reveal blinding light. David retreated silently into the cockpit. Mark stood stiffly at attention. Sarah stared at her hands, too ashamed to meet anyone's eyes. And the passengers who had once sided with Gregory now avoided looking at Alana at all, as if their silence had turned to stone. Alicia smiled softly from her seat. I have to say, you handled that with incredible grace. I don't know many who could. Alana turned to her, her voice gentle but firm. I never wanted to win through anger. Alicia, I wanted them to see their mistake in the light of truth. Several passengers bowed their heads. Some whispered apologies. Others quietly reached for their phones, perhaps to delete the cruel comments they had posted when this all began. Gregory looked up again, voice hoarse. I'm truly sorry. I was wrong. Alana's eyes softened. You don't owe me an apology. Mr. Haynes, you owe yourself an awakening. Her words hung in the air like a mirror, and in that reflection, every person saw a truth they could no longer ignore. The plane still hadn't taken off, yet everyone aboard knew they had already begun a different kind of journey, one of truth, of awareness, of justice. As the captain stepped out, Alana rose and walked toward the front of the cabin. She didn't need titles or applause. Each step echoed like a clock ticking in the silence, and when she turned to face the crew, her smile said it all. True power isn't in position. It's in how you use it. The first-class cabin of SilverWing Airlines was so still, it seemed even the air had stopped moving. After Dr. Alana Pierce's true identity was revealed, no one dared to breathe too loudly. Captain David Raines had just left his face drained of color, and Gregory Haynes, the once arrogant passenger who'd scorned her, now sat hunched over, wishing he could vanish. A few passengers glanced at Alana with a mix of awe and fear. At the front of the cabin, Sarah and Mark, the two flight attendants, stood frozen, unsure whether to apologize or await orders. No one spoke. There were no words left that would suffice. Then Alana rose. She wasn't tall, and she wasn't angry, yet her presence filled the space with quiet command. Her low heels tapped softly against the carpet. Click, 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 a small sound, but one that made every head turn. She didn't search for anyone's eyes. She simply stood in the aisle, facing all of them, her voice calm, clear, and deeply resonant. I am Dr. Alana Pierce, founder and current executive chair of SilverWing Airlines. This company was built on a single promise to ensure dignity for every passenger, regardless of race, status, or seat class. And today, her gaze swept from Gregory to Sarah, to Mark, then toward the cockpit door left slightly ajar. Today, we failed. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. They fell like a gavel, soft, final, and undeniable. Mark tried to speak, his voice cracking. Madam Pierce. Oh, he never meant. She raised a hand, stopping him gently. You don't need to explain. Mark, everything has already been recorded, and I'm not standing here to listen to excuses. I'm standing here because if SilverWing truly represents fairness, then we must act especially when it's hardest to. The cabin stayed silent. Sarah's tears began to fall, not from fear of losing her job, but from the realization that she'd betrayed her own belief that everyone deserved equal respect. Alana took a slow step forward, her tone deepening. Captain David Raines suspended indefinitely, pending investigation by the board. A stunned hush fell over the passengers. She continued, Head Attendant Mark Ellison relieved of duty until completion of mandatory unconscious bias and passenger equality training. Mark lowered his head. She wasn't angry. She was accountable, and somehow, that made the judgment cut even deeper. And you, Sarah Delaney. Alana's voice softened. I'm not dismissing you, but you'll be reassigned to our training division. You'll tell this story to every new flight attendant, because they need to understand the lesson you learned today. Sarah's voice trembled as she wiped her eyes. Thank you, ma'am. I'll do better. I promise. Alana gave her a small nod before turning toward the man still slumped in shame. Gregory Haynes. Mr. Haynes, she said evenly, your behavior goes against every value this airline stands for. Effective immediately. You are permanently banned from flying with SilverWing. Gregory's head snapped up, his face blotched red. You can't do that. I'm a shareholder. Alana's smile was faint but sharp enough to stop him cold. You may be a shareholder, but I'm a founder, and it's my duty to protect the dignity of every employee and every passenger who's been demeaned by arrogance. SilverWing does not sell tickets to people who forget that others have hearts. A single clap echoed from the back row, where Alicia Monroe, the black attorney, sat watching. Her applause was soft, deliberate. Others joined hesitant at first, then more, until the sound swelled into a quiet wave of solidarity. A middle-aged passenger murmured, Thank you. You just did what most of us never had the courage to. Alana shook her head gently. Don't thank me. Just promise me this, that from now on, no one on a SilverWing flight will ever have to prove they belong in the seat they've paid for. Sarah stepped forward, offering a tissue, even though Alana hadn't shed a tear. The gesture was small, but it carried the weight of understanding. Gregory remained silent. His eyes were downcast, filled with regret. Then, through the intercom, a quiet message came from the cockpit. Dr. Pierce, this is David. I'm sorry. I take full responsibility. The flight is ready for takeoff at your command. Alana looked toward the cockpit. No, Captain Raines, she replied evenly. This flight will not depart until a new crew has been assigned. I want every passenger to fly with people who understand what the word dignity truly means. Several passengers nodded, some openly wiping away tears. An elderly woman whispered, This isn't a flight anymore. It's a lesson for life. Alana took her seat once more. Sunlight streamed through the small cabin window, illuminating her calm, unwavering face. She knew that what had happened here would travel far beyond one plane or one airline. It would become a reminder that human dignity cannot be measured by class, wealth, or seat number. When the plane finally touched back down, every message, recording, and internal report from the flight was already in the hands of SilverWing's board of directors. Within hours, the entire aviation industry would know about one defining event, Flight 227, the lesson in dignity above the clouds. The air in SilverWing Airlines' first-class cabin had settled after the storm. Everyone remained seated, silent, staring at Dr. Alana Pierce, the woman they had dismissed as out of place minutes earlier, now standing as the only one in control. After announcing the suspension of the captain, the reassignment of Mark, and Sarah's transfer, Alana stood by the window. The fading sunlight cast a long golden glow across the glass. reflecting her face serene yet unyielding. She wasn't thinking of punishment or power. What she carried on her shoulders was heavier than authority. It was responsibility. She turned back to the passengers, her voice calm, warm, and deliberate, more like a storyteller than an executive. I want everyone here to understand something clearly. This is not revenge. This is accountability. The entire cabin fell silent. Gregory, the man who had said, "You people always think you belong up here," sat hunched forward, hands clenched, the weight of shame pulling him down. For perhaps the first time in his life, he understood the gulf between power and character. Alana's gaze swept across the room, not sharp, not condemning, but filled with a deep compassion born from experience. She had seen too much pain to believe fear ever changed anyone. Only truth did. "We'll be replacing the entire flight crew," she said evenly. "No one here will be left behind. But SilverWing will not take off under a crew that doesn't understand the meaning of dignity." A few passengers drew in quiet breaths. Some nodded as if finding their own reflection of justice in her words. "The replacement crew will arrive in 30 minutes, Alana continued. "We'll depart once they're ready." Mark Ellison, the once confident head attendant, bowed his head low. "Dr. Pierce, I know an apology can't undo what's been done, but I promise I'll return as a better man. If you'll let me, I'd like to start over from the beginning." Alana nodded softly. "I hope so. Mark, SilverWing doesn't need perfection. It needs people willing to change." Sarah, eyes red, spoke in a trembling whisper. "Ma'am, I thought following procedure meant I wouldn't make mistakes. But now I see by staying silent, I became part of the mistake." Alana smiled gently. "You know, Sarah, there are lessons no manual can teach. We only learn them when we're brave enough to face the truth, especially when it shames us." Then she turned to Alicia Monroe, the lawyer whose courage had turned silence into strength. "Thank you, Alicia. Your courage reminded me why I helped found this airline so that people like you and me could fly without having to prove we deserved to." Alicia smiled faintly, tired but proud. "Dr. Pierce, sometimes all it takes is one person standing up and the whole room changes." Alana nodded. She knew that more than anyone. When the replacement crew finally arrived, Alana signed the transfer documents. The cabin was still quiet, but the silence had changed. It was no longer heavy with fear. It was filled with respect. Before leaving the plane, Alana turned once more to address everyone. "When you tell this story, please tell it truthfully, not with judgment, but with honesty, because only truth helps us grow." Then she walked down the aisle, her posture straight and unhurried, as if she wasn't walking through a cabin full of humbled onlookers, but through the memories of every time she'd been told she didn't belong. 1:15, an hour later, while Flight 227 finally lifted off under a new crew, Alana sat in an emergency meeting at SilverWing headquarters in Denver. She opened her laptop and began typing a report addressed to the board of directors. The subject line read, "Immediate action required. Incident on Flight 227, SilverWing Air." But the report wasn't just corporate language. It was a blend of fact, reflection, and resolve. "We failed to uphold our core value, dignity in flight. This wasn't a single person's fault, but proof our system isn't strong enough to confront implicit bias. I propose the immediate creation of an independent oversight council to investigate all discrimination-related complaints. All frontline employees and crew will complete the Equity in Action program within 60 days. SilverWing was built to prove the skies belong to everyone, and starting today, we will live by that truth. She signed it, Dr. Alana Pierce, chairwoman and co-founder, SilverWing Airlines. After the email sent, Alana leaned back. The sunset gleamed through her office glass, reflecting off the runway below, where Flight 227 was now rising into the evening sky. A faint smile touched her lips. Not victory, but faith. Faith that justice, however delayed, could still take flight. The next morning, headlines across the country exploded. SilverWing CEO intervenes in mid-air racism scandal. Issues industry-wide reform plan. Clips of Alana's calm but piercing statement, "This is not revenge. This is responsibility," went viral within hours. The hashtag #BasaDignity in flight spread across every platform from New York to Seattle, from major outlets to passengers' personal posts. Among thousands of comments, one stood out, a quiet message that Alana later read in her office. "I've flown SilverWing for 10 years. Now I understand why I always felt safe. Because people like Dr. Pierce choose wisdom over anger." Alana smiled softly, turned off her screen, and let the quiet return. She didn't need applause. The truth had already spoken. But the world never stops at one story. As the video spread, hundreds of outlets began digging deeper, and thousands of comments divided into praise and outrage. Amid that growing media storm, Alana knew her real test was only just beginning. At dawn over Denver's western mountains, Dr. Alana Pierce was already at SilverWing Airlines headquarters. She expected an ordinary morning meetings, reform planning, crisis follow-ups. But minutes after she stepped into her glass-walled office, her assistant rushed in, face pale. "Dr. Pierce, the video's everywhere." Alana froze mid-stride, standing before the glowing SilverWing logo behind her. "Which video?" she asked, though deep down, she already knew. "Flight 227, ma'am." A passenger posted the entire recording. 12 million views in 8 hours. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded. "Then it's time," she said quietly, "for the world to see the whole story." Online, it was as if the entire nation had tuned in to one public trial. The viral clip opened with Gregory Haynes sneering, "You people always think you belong up here," and ended with Alana's calm, steady voice in first class, "This isn't revenge, this is responsibility." Within hours, dignity in flight trended worldwide. Millions shared, argued, and reflected. A woman in Texas wrote, "I'm white. I've flown SilverWing for 10 years, and I thought I understood fairness until I watched this." A retired pilot tweeted, "She handled that with a dignity too many in our industry have forgotten." Another user posted, "Thank you, Dr. Pierce. You didn't just stand for people of color. You stood for everyone who's ever been silently dismissed." Inside SilverWing's communications wing, phones rang nonstop. Reporters from CNN, NBC, Reuters. Even the BBC demanded statements. Nathan Clark, CEO and Alana's longtime co-founder, called the event a moral reckoning in mid-air. But he knew good words weren't enough, real action had to follow. That afternoon, SilverWing Airlines held an emergency press conference. The room was packed shoulder to shoulder with cameras and reporters, flashes sparking like lightning. Nathan opened solemnly, "On behalf of SilverWing, I offer our deepest apology to Dr. Pierce, to every passenger on Flight 227, and to the public. What happened aboard that flight was unacceptable." He stepped aside. Alana approached the microphone, a folder in hand. Her tone was firm, deliberate, unshakable. I don't seek sympathy, nor am I here for compensation. I want people to understand one thing. Dignity is not a commodity to be bargained. The room went silent. The cameras zoomed closer. Then Nathan listed the company's immediate actions. Captain David Raines, terminated for gross professional misconduct. Chief Attendant Mark Ellison, suspended for 6 months, required to undergo recertification. Flight Attendant Sarah Delaney reassigned to the training center, tasked with teaching new crews about Flight 227 as a living lesson. Passenger Gregory Haynes, permanently banned from all SilverWing flights. Creation of an independent oversight council, composed of experts and citizens, empowered to investigate any bias-related complaint within the airline. Alana looked across the room, her gaze steady, her voice composed. "We're not doing this to save our image," she said. "We're doing it to restore trust." A reporter raised a hand. "Dr. Pierce, aren't you concerned these actions could cost SilverWing millions?" She smiled faintly. "Of course, but losing money is nothing compared to losing our soul." That single line became the quote of the day. The New York Times headline read, "SilverWing Chairwoman, Dignity is not negotiable." CNN opened its evening report with, "What began as a single confrontation has ignited the biggest conversation about bias in aviation since the 1980s. On Southern radio stations, callers shared emotional stories. I've seen it happen before. But no one ever had the courage to say it out loud like she did." Within SilverWing's offices, inboxes overflowed with messages of support. Other airlines announced plans to adopt SilverWing's new oversight model. But not everyone applauded. Critics accused Alana of staging the incident for PR. Tabloids ran sensational headlines. CEO orchestrates mid-air drama to save her brand. When her assistant nervously showed her the articles, Alana merely smiled. "Let them talk," she said calmly. "If they're still arguing, it means we made them think." That night, Alana returned home long after midnight. The only light came from her laptop. The viral video played again, comments pouring in by the second. But instead of scrolling, she opened a blank document labeled Projects and began typing SilverWing Humanity Initiative, the Global Dignity Project. Her vision to carry SilverWing's values beyond aviation into schools, hospitals, and workplaces anywhere people needed the reminder that respect is not a privilege, it's a right. Et tu, She saved the file, leaned back, and exhaled. She wasn't tired from the criticism. She was tired from understanding how big the next step had to be. Once you open a door to change, there's no turning back. 2 days later, SilverWing convened its first National Leadership Summit. Hundreds of managers, supervisors, and senior staff gathered in silence. When Alana stepped onto the stage, no one clapped, they simply stood, and in that stillness, she began. What happened wasn't an accident, it was the system. 2 days after the media storm, the SilverWing Airlines headquarters in Denver glowed with light long before dawn. Regional directors, department heads, and executives from across the country had been summoned for an emergency leadership summit. The atmosphere in the conference room was strange, not tense, but heavy. A silence hung in the air, the kind that comes before something important is about to be said. At the head of the table sat Dr. Alana Pierce. Before her were dozens of faces, people who had overseen thousands of flights, made hundreds of decisions each day. But today, they weren't here to direct. They were here to listen. On the screen behind her, the footage from Flight 227 played again, this time without sound. Gregory Haynes's sneer. "You people always think you belong up here." Then Alana's calm response. And finally, that defining moment when she stood in the aisle and said, "This isn't revenge, this is responsibility." When the video ended, no one spoke. No one dared to applaud. No one could meet her eyes. Alana rose slowly and walked to the center of the room. No microphone, no notes. Her voice was steady, low, and clear, like a story told at dusk, I've heard people say. That was just an accident. But I want us all to understand something. What happened on that flight was not an accident. She paused, scanning the room. An accident is a bird flying off course, or a storm catching you off guard. This was a system that let hidden bias become instinct, that taught people silence was safer than integrity, that allowed offenders to hide behind one-word procedure. No one moved. Some lowered their heads. Others sighed quietly. Her tone softened, but her conviction deepened. I've seen many of us believe that having good intentions is enough. Believing in fairness, believing in kindness, believing that if we don't do harm, we're doing good. But I'm sorry, belief alone is not enough. She stepped closer to the front row, her words no longer a speech, but a conversation. Belief only matters when it becomes action. A flight attendant who witnesses injustice and stays silent isn't neutral. They're complicit. A captain who defends what's wrong in the name of passenger comfort. That's not leadership. That's cowardice. Her words fell slowly, deliberately not sharp, but heavy. She wasn't condemning them. She was asking them to confront themselves. Power isn't meant to protect privilege. She continued. It's meant to protect the vulnerable. And if we don't use power the right way, it will turn against us. On the right side of the room, an older regional manager, gray-haired, weary, raised his hand. Dr. Pierce, where do we even start? How do you change something that's this deeply rooted? Alana looked at him and smiled gently, a smile of understanding, not triumph. We start where every real change begins with ourselves. She turned toward the screen and nodded to her assistant. A new slide appeared, the SilverWing Leadership Pledge. The screen read, 1. Never stay silent in the face of injustice. 2. Never excuse bias by calling it procedure. 3. Never use power to preserve privilege. 4. Protect human dignity for passengers, colleagues, and even competitors. 5. Act. Don't just believe. From today forward, Alana said, every SilverWing leader will sign this pledge, not to hang on a wall, but to remind ourselves that power comes with responsibility. And that responsibility doesn't end with running an airline. It extends to sustaining society's faith in what's right. A round of quiet applause spread through the room, not out of politeness, but out of awakening. Nathan Clark, SilverWing's CEO and Alana's co-founder, stood and said with deep sincerity, Alana, I've led this company for years, but today I finally understand why people call you the soul of SilverWing. Alana smiled softly. No one is the soul of a system. Nathan, a system only has a soul when the people within it choose to stand for what's right. Her words lingered in the air like sunlight breaking through after a storm. When the meeting ended, Alana stepped into the hallway bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Her young assistant followed and asked quietly, Dr. Pierce, do you really think the world out there will change? Alana stopped, her eyes drifting toward the runway where planes were lifting into the clouds. No, she said softly. I don't think the world changes because of one speech, but I believe that every time someone holds on to their dignity in the face of injustice, the world gets a little better." The assistant smiled, saying nothing. Alana walked on, her steps slow but steady, each one a quiet reminder. There are battles that need no weapons, only wisdom, courage, and the strength to do what's right. Months passed since the events of Flight 227, but the story of Dr. Alana Pierce and her lesson in dignity above the clouds continued to be told in training programs, universities, and global conferences. They called it the legacy of resolve, a legacy not built in boardrooms, but in the way people chose to treat one another. Time passed, but the echo of SilverWing Flight 227 never truly faded. The story of Dr. Alana Pierce, the woman who was humiliated aboard the very airline she helped build, had grown far beyond a single aviation incident. It became a living reminder of something most people thought they understood, yet rarely felt in their bones. Dignity isn't a privilege, it's a human right. After that leadership summit, SilverWing began to change for real. The new training videos no longer taught how to smile on cue or handle turbulence. They taught how to see people, not seat classes. In every course, they played a short clip from Flight 227. Alana saying, "This isn't revenge, this is responsibility." And when the screen went dark, silence always followed. No one was asked to comment, but everyone left the room a little quieter, a little more thoughtful. The press gave Alana many names: the woman who changed the skies, the conscience of aviation, even the Rosa Parks of modern flight. But she never saw herself as a hero. In one interview, when asked how it felt to become a symbol, she simply smiled and said, "I never tried to be a symbol. I just refused to be silent one more time." That simple line touched millions. One spring morning, Alana attended the opening ceremony of the SilverWing Humanity Initiative, the global program she had conceived that sleepless night after the scandal. The auditorium was filled with young students, airline workers, journalists, and victims of discrimination from around the world. She stepped onto the stage not under bright lights, but to slow, sincere applause. No prepared speech, only a small note card with a few handwritten words. "I've spent most of my life trying to make systems run right. But today, I've realized what needs to run right first is the human heart." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd, and stopped when she saw Sarah Delaney, the young flight attendant who once doubted her, now a lead instructor in the Equity in Action program. Their eyes met. Both smiled. No words, only forgiveness and growth. "We were trained to stay calm in every situation." Alana continued, "But calm doesn't mean silence. Sometimes the greatest calm is when you speak the truth without letting anger drown out your wisdom." Applause filled the room, not wild or performative, but steady and genuine. A year later, Human Rights Watch honored her with the Leadership and Justice Award. When the host praised SilverWing as a model for global reform, Alana stepped up the same calm poise, a simple gray blazer, no showmanship. "I accept this not for myself," she began softly, "but for everyone who was ever made to feel not enough because of their skin, their accent, or their status. I accept it for the worker who was dismissed, for the passenger who was doubted, and for the employee who spoke up and was ignored." Then she lifted her head and looked straight into the camera. "If there's one thing I've learned, It's this dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you claim. With intellect, with courage, and with steadfast resolve. That moment became immortal, quoted, printed, and replayed around the world as a declaration. Dignity is not given. It is claimed. After the ceremony, an older journalist approached and shook her hand. "I've covered scandals and power plays my whole career," he said, "but I've rarely seen anyone hold on to their humanity in the middle of fury like you did." Alana smiled gently. "Sometimes," she replied. "Kindness is the strongest way to make someone face their own wrongs." Her story spread far beyond aviation. A university in California launched a course titled Ethics in Leadership, centered on the SilverWing 227 case. Major corporations invited her to speak about emotional intelligence in leadership. But the reward she treasured most wasn't awards or applause. It was the letters. One came from a 12-year-old black girl in Mississippi, Ms. Pierce. "I've never seen anyone who looks like me run an airline. Now I want to do it too." Another, from a former flight attendant in Dallas. "I once stayed silent when someone insulted a passenger. But because of you, I realize silence is also a choice, and I choose not to be silent anymore." Alana read every letter carefully and kept them in a small wooden box on her desk. In her notebook beside it, she wrote one line: "If every person dared to speak one true sentence in their life, the world would already be different." That evening, as Denver's skyline shimmered in city lights, Alana sat by her window, watching SilverWing planes glide down the runway, their red and green lights flickering against the night. She whispered to herself, "Back then, they said I didn't belong here. Today, I just want everyone to know the sky belongs to all of us." A soft wind stirred, carrying with it something invisible yet powerful, the gratitude of countless strangers touched by her quiet, unyielding strength. And so, from one small moment aboard a plane, a woman left a legacy for an entire generation, not through power or fame, but through how she lived, how she stood steady in the face of injustice, and how she never let bitterness replace grace. Because in the end, dignity is not a favor, it is a human right. No matter who you are or where you come from, if you hold on to wisdom and resolve, then you already carry the greatest legacy of all freedom within your own soul. The story of Dr. Alana Pierce isn't just about an incident on a plane. It's a mirror held up to society, where prejudice, class, and power still quietly shape how we see one another. But what made Alana powerful wasn't the authority she held. It was how she chose to respond, not with anger, not by lowering herself, but by meeting injustice with intelligence and unwavering dignity. That message speaks to all of us. In life, every one of us has been underestimated, judged unfairly for our background, our skin, our job, or even the sound of our voice. Yet in those very moments, we each have a choice to answer with dignity, to stay calm, to speak truth, and to let our actions be the loudest reply. Because dignity isn't something others give you, it's something you hold on to, even when the world shakes around you. And when one person dares to stand firm with resolve, they don't just free themselves, they light the way for others to see what justice truly looks like. If you believe that kindness and wisdom can still change the world, hit like, share this video, and subscribe so together we can keep spreading stories that remind us of our shared humanity, where people are seen, respected, and treated with the dignity they deserve. Thank you for listening.